The cold bit harder than chains ever could. That's what he told himself as the wind slapped against his face, carrying the sting of sea, salt, and frost. His name was Arn once, back when he had a family, a farm, and the kind of life that felt steady and predictable. Now, he was nothing more than a thrall, a Viking slave, shackled to the deck of a longship cutting through gray waters. The oar in his hands weighed more than his body felt it should, and every stroke was a reminder that his freedom had been traded away for the simple mistake of losing a battle he never wanted to fight. The Vikings called it honor, raiding, burning, taking what they wanted. But for those who ended up on the wrong side of their blades, honor was a word that didn't mean much. Arn had learned that quickly, the day they stormed his village. He had been trying to protect his little sister, pulling her behind a cart, when the men with painted shields and iron axes came crashing in like storm. His father had been cut down. His mother had been shoved to the ground. And Arn, well, he had been too young to fight like a warrior, but too strong to ignore. A perfect thrall. The longship rocked, and Arnie's back screamed with pain. The overseer, one of the Viking warriors who had taken him, walked along the row of chained men, swinging a whip lazily, not because he needed to use it, but because the sound of it cracking against the wooden deck kept everyone's arms moving. The oars dipped in and out of the freezing sea, timed to the harsh bark of commands. The slaves were packed so close together that their shoulders touched. Arn could feel the shallow, ragged breathing of the man beside him. That man was named Einar, or at least that's what he said. Arn didn't know if it was true. Most of the slaves lied about their names, either to hide who they had been or because they didn't want anyone remembering them when they were gone. Einar had been a farmer like Arn, but unlike Arn, he didn't bother holding on to hope. Every night, when they were given a few scraps of bread or dried fish, Einar would mutter under his breath, "Better to drown than row for them forever." But drowning wasn't so simple. The Vikings tied their thralls well, and even if someone managed to wriggle free, the icy waters would kill them before they had a chance to swim. Arn wasn't ready to die like that. Not yet. The worst part wasn't the rowing or even the hunger. It was the smell of freedom just out of reach. Every time the Vikings laughed among themselves, drank from their horn cups, or talked about the gold they would get from selling their captives, Arn felt anger twist in his chest. They weren't cruel for the sake of it, at least not always. But they didn't see thralls as people. Slaves were tools, like the oars or the ropes holding the ship together. And when a tool broke, it got thrown overboard. By the time the longship reached the shore, Arnie's hands were raw, and his arms shook with exhaustion. The Vikings jumped off first, their boots sinking into the wet sand, shouting in their language as they dragged the slaves off the boat. Arn stumbled, his legs stiff from sitting too long. The beach smelled of smoke, and when he looked up, he saw the faint outline of settlement in the distance. Tall wooden walls, houses with slanted roofs, smoke rising from cooking fires. This was where his new life would begin, if he could call it life. The Viking who had captured him, an older man with braids in his beard and a scar running across his cheek, jerked Arnie's chain hard enough to nearly pull him to the ground. "Move," the man growled. Arn didn't understand all the words yet, but he understood enough. He followed, careful not to trip because falling meant getting whipped. The group of slaves was herded toward the settlement, where curious villagers came out to watch. Some of the free Vikings pointed and laughed, while others looked at the thralls the way one might look at cattle. A woman with bright red hair shouted something to the man who held Arnie's chain, and they both laughed. Arn didn't need to understand the language to know they were laughing at him. They were brought to a wooden enclosure where other slaves were already waiting. Some were chopping wood. Some were carrying heavy buckets of water from a well. A few were tending to animals, their faces blank, their movements slow but steady. Arn noticed how none of them looked at him directly. It wasn't because they were rude. It was because looking at a new slave was dangerous. If someone looked too long, the overseers might think they were talking secretly or planning something. That first night, they were given watery porridge and a hard piece of bread. Arn sat near the wall of the enclosure, his back against the rough wood, staring up at the night sky. The stars were bright, clearer than he had ever seen them at home. But instead of comfort, they brought him a strange kind of sadness. They were the same stars he had looked at with his sister, sitting outside their little house. Somewhere, she might still be looking at them too. He wondered if she had been taken or if she had escaped. He didn't know which was worse. Einar sat beside him, slurping his porridge without caring how disgusting it tasted. "You'll get used to it," Einar said after a while. "The hunger, the cold, the beatings, all of it." Arn didn't answer. He didn't want to get used to it. In the weeks that followed, Arn learned what it meant to be a thrall. Days started before the sun rose and ended only when the overseers grew tired of yelling. He chopped wood until his hands blistered. He hauled heavy stones to help build walls. Sometimes he worked in the fields, bent over for hours, his back screaming with pain. At night, they slept on straw, crowded together in a small shed that smelled of damp wood and sweat. And yet, even in that misery, Arn couldn't stop thinking of escape. He watched the Vikings carefully, memorizing when they changed guards or when they left tools lying around. He listened when they spoke, picking up pieces of their language. He noticed which paths led to the forest and which ones led to the shore. But every time he thought he might have a chance, he remembered Einar's words, "Better to drown than row forever." Arn wasn't ready to drown, but he was starting to think he might not have a choice. One cold evening, after a long day of hauling stones, Arn sat near the fence of the slave enclosure, too tired to even eat. The sky was dark, and most of the other thralls were already sleeping. But Arn stayed awake, staring at the gate. Something was different tonight. The guard were arguing about something near the longhouse, too distracted to keep their usual patrol. Arnie's heart began to pound. He didn't know why, but for the first time, it felt like something was about to happen. And then, through the shadows near the edge of the enclosure, a voice whispered his name. Arn froze. His name, his real name, hadn't been spoken since the day he was taken. The Vikings didn't care to learn it, and the other thralls rarely risked talking in the open. For a moment, he wondered if he had imagined it, just a trick of exhaustion. But then the whisper came again, softer this time. "Arn here." He turned his head slightly, careful not to draw attention. There, crouched in the darkness near the fence, was a figure. The dim light from the nearby torch didn't reach that far, but he could make out a familiar outline. Thin, hunched, hair falling over a tired face. It was Einar. "What are you doing?" Arn whispered back, barely moving his lips. Einar glanced at the guards, who were still distracted near the longhouse. "Keep your voice down," he murmured. "Tonight might be the only chance we get." Arn felt his heart hammer against his chest. He shifted closer, his back still against the wooden fence to make it seem like he was just leaning. "What chance?" Einar's eyes flicked toward the gate. They left it unlocked. Not all the way, but enough. Someone forgot to bolt it after feeding the animals. "If we're quiet, we might be able to slip out before anyone notices." Arn stared at him, unsure if he should feel hope or fear. "And then what? We run into the woods. You think we'll get far?" Einar's jaw tightened. "Better to try than die here, chopping wood like an ox." Arn hesitated. Every instinct told him this was madness. The Vikings were cruel, but they weren't fools. If two thralls disappeared, they would hunt them. And if they were caught, the punishment would be worse than anything they had faced so far. But then again, what was the alternative? A lifetime of servitude until his body gave out and they dumped him in a ditch? He looked toward the other thralls, most of whom were asleep, their faces pale in the faint light. No one else had noticed the conversation. When Arn finally asked, Einar gave a faint, humorless smile. "Now," before they finished their arguing. The words felt heavy in the cold night air. Arn took a deep breath, glancing at the guard again. They were still shouting at each other, their attention fixed on whatever had gone wrong near the longhouse. A rare mistake, maybe, or some argument over treasure. Einar crawled toward the gate, his movements slow and careful. Arn followed, every muscle tense, feeling like the entire world could hear his heart pounding. The straw beneath them crunched softly, but the guards didn't turn their heads. The gate loomed closer, its wooden frame casting long shadows. Einar pressed his hand against it, testing the latch. It creaked slightly, and Arn felt his breath catch in his throat. But the guards didn't notice. Einar pushed again, slower this time, and the gate shifted open just wide enough for a man to slip through. "Go," Einar whispered. Arn didn't move. He stared at the gap, his mind racing. If they escaped, where would they go? The forest was thick and cold. They had no food, no weapons, and no idea how far the nearest village might be. But if they stayed, this life of chains would crush whatever hope was left inside him. He swallowed hard, then nodded. Einar slipped out first, moving like a shadow. Arn followed, ducking low as he stepped through the narrow opening. His foot sank into soft earth, and for the first time in weeks, there was no fence around him. No chains, just open air. The forest loomed just beyond the settlement, dark and silent except for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Einar crouched low, his eyes darting to every movement. Arn stayed close behind him, keeping his steps light. They moved quickly, but every sound felt too loud. The crunch of leaves, the soft snap of a twig. Arn glanced back once, just long enough to see the flicker of torchlight near the longhouse. The guards were still distracted, but for how long? When they reached the edge of the forest, Einar paused, his breath visible in the cold night air. "We need to go deep," he whispered. "If they bring dogs, they'll smell us near the edge." Arn nodded, following him into the trees. The branches above seemed to close in as they pushed farther inside, the settlement's lights fading behind them. For a moment, Arn felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But it didn't last. A horn sounded in the distance, sharp and loud, cutting through the stillness of the night. Arn froze. Einar cursed under his breath. The sound came again, longer this time. The guards had noticed. "They know," Arn whispered. "Keep moving," Einar said, his voice tense. "They'll search the paths first. If we keep off them, we might have a chance." They ran now, weaving through the trees, their breath coming in quick bursts. The cold air burned Arnie's lungs, but he didn't dare slow down. The forest floor was uneven, and he stumbled more than once, catching himself before falling. Behind them, the sound of shouting grew louder. The Vikings were moving quickly, their torches glowing like angry stars in the distance. Arnie's legs screamed for rest, but he kept running. The horn sounded again, closer this time, and then came the barking, faint at first but growing stronger. "Dogs," Arn said, panic rising in his chest. Einar glanced back, his face pale in the moonlight. "We need to lose them. Water. If we can find a stream, maybe—" But the forest ahead was nothing but shadows and endless trees. And then, just as they turned sharply down a slope, Arnie's foot caught on a root. He stumbled, falling hard to the ground. The impact knocked the air from his chest, and, for a second, everything spun. Einar rushed back, grabbing his arm. "Get up." Arn pushed himself to his feet, his legs shaky. But before they could move again, the horn sounded once more, this time so close it felt like it was just beyond the trees. Einar's grip tightened on his arm. "We have to hide." They ducked behind a thick cluster of bushes, crouching low as the sound of footsteps approached. Torches flickered through the trees, and the barking of dogs grew louder. Arn held his breath, his heart hammering. Through the leaves, he saw them. 3 Viking warriors, their fur cloaks swinging as they moved, dogs straining against leashes. One of the men held a spear, its point glinting in the faint moonlight. The dogs sniffed the ground, pulling the men closer to where Arn and Einar crouched. Einar's eyes darted to Arnie's, his expression grim. The dog stopped. One of them lifted its head, ears twitching, and then it turned directly toward them, growling low in its throat. The growl grew louder, rumbling deep in the dog's chest as it pulled against its leash. The Viking holding it yanked back sharply, muttering something in a harsh tone. But the dog ignored him, straining forward, nose pressed to the ground. Einar's hand gripped Arnie's arm so tightly it hurt. Neither of them moved, not even to breathe. Leaves pressed against Arnie's face, and he felt a branch digging into his side, but he didn't dare shift an inch. The Viking with the spear stepped closer, his boots crunching against the dry leaves. "What is it?" he called to the man holding the dog. Arn didn't understand the words, but the tone was sharp, questioning. The man crouched, touching the ground near where the dog sniffed. His fingers brushed the earth, and Arn saw his brow furrow as he studied the disturbed dirt. Einar's breath was so shallow it barely moved his chest. Arnie's heart pounded so loudly he was sure the Vikings would hear it. The third warrior, standing a little farther back, shifted impatiently. He said something that sounded dismissive, shaking his head. The man with the spear responded with a sharp word, glancing toward the bushes where Arn and Einar crouched. The dogs barked suddenly, loud and vicious, lunging toward the bushes. The Vikings surged forward. Einar didn't wait. His hand shot out, pushing Arn to his feet. "Run," he hissed. They burst from the bushes, branches tearing at their clothes as they sprinted deeper into the forest. Behind them, the warriors shouted, the dogs barking furiously as they broke free from the leaves. Arnie's legs felt like fire, every muscle screaming, but adrenaline drove him forward. The moonlight filtered weakly through the trees, casting long shadows that danced as they ran. Roots snagged at his feet, and branches whipped his face, but he didn't slow. "Faster," Einar called, his voice breathless. The horns sounded again, this time close enough to make Arnie's chest tighten with fear. More warriors would be coming, drawn by the signal. They scrambled down a steep slope, sliding more than running, dirt and leaves scattering under their boots. At the bottom, they landed hard, stumbling into a shallow gully. Einar looked around quickly. "We need water," he said between ragged breaths. "The dogs, they can track us if we stay on dry ground." Arn scanned the darkness, his ears filled with the sound of barking and shouting closing in behind them. "I don't see anything." "There!" Einar pointed to the left, where a faint glimmer reflected the moonlight, a narrow stream winding between the trees. They sprinted toward it, splashing into the icy water without hesitation. The cold bit at Arnie's legs, soaking through his trousers instantly, but he forced himself to keep moving. The current was shallow, but it ran fast enough to wash away their scent. "Stay in the stream," Einar said, his voice low now. "Follow it as far as we can." They waded through the water, keeping low, every step careful to avoid making too much noise. The forest around them felt alive with sound. The distant shouts of Vikings, the angry barks of dogs, the snap of branches as the search party moved through the woods. Arnie's teeth chattered from the cold, but he didn't dare complain. Every second mattered. Minutes passed, maybe longer, as they trudged through the stream, their legs numb from the freezing water. Slowly, the barking grew fainter, the torches no longer visible through the trees. When they finally stopped, Einar leaned against a rock, his chest heaving. "We bought some time," he said quietly. "Not much, but enough to get farther before they pick up the trail again." Arn sat on the edge of the stream, his breath coming in shaky bursts. His body ached from running, but he didn't dare rest long. "Where are we even going?" Einar's face was grim. "South. If we can reach the hills, maybe we can find shelter. There are places where they don't patrol as much." But he looked up at the sky, his expression darkening. "We'll need food, and if we don't find it soon, we'll freeze before they ever catch us." Arn stared at his reflection in the water, barely recognizing the tired, dirt-smeared face staring back. "Do you think anyone's ever actually escaped? I mean, really made it?" Einar didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the forest, scanning for movement. Finally, he said, "I've heard stories, but stories don't keep you warm at night." That silence stretched between them for a moment, broken only by the soft gurgle of the stream. Then, faintly, somewhere behind them, a horn sounded again. Einar stiffened. "They're still searching. We can't stay here." Arn forced himself to stand, his legs shaking. Every step felt heavier than the last, but he followed Einar as they climbed out of the stream and pressed deeper into the woods. The forest seemed darker now, as if the night itself was closing in around them. They walked for what felt like hours, pausing only when a sound made them freeze. Once, Arn thought he saw a torch flicker far behind them, but it disappeared quickly. Another time, they heard the distant crash of branches and the low growl of a dog. When the forest finally thinned slightly, Einar raised a hand to stop. "We'll rest here," he whispered. They crouched near a fallen tree, using its thick trunk for cover. Einar tore a strip from his tunic, wrapping it around Arne's bleeding hand where a branch had scraped him. Arn barely felt it. The cold had numbed most of the pain. As the minutes passed, exhaustion began to settle in. Arn leaned back against the log, his eyelids heavy. For a brief moment, he almost felt safe. But safety didn't last long in a Viking's world. A snap of a twig nearby made both of them tense instantly. Einar's head jerked toward the sound. The forest had gone silent, too silent, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Arn strained his ears, trying to hear past the pounding of his own heart. There, soft footsteps, careful, deliberate, moving closer. Einar mouthed a single word. "Hide!" They slid behind the log, pressing close to the cold ground, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps drew nearer, slow and cautious, like whoever it was knew they were close. A shadow passed over the ground as someone moved between the trees. Arn glimpsed a pair of boots, fur-lined, heavy, the kind Vikings wore on long hunts. The figure stopped just a few feet away, turning slightly, as if listening. Then another sound came, faint but unmistakable, the soft growl of a dog. Einar's hand tightened around Arne's wrist, his expression grim. The dog's growl grew louder, its claws scratching at the leaves as it sniffed the ground. The figure crouched, muttering something in a low voice. The dog moved closer to the log, nose pressed to the dirt. And then, as the torchlight flickered just inches from their hiding place, the dog's head lifted, its eyes locking directly onto them. The dog barked, loud and sharp, breaking the quiet of the forest. The Viking crouched beside it, straightened instantly, his hand gripping his spear as he turned toward the log. Einar didn't hesitate. His hand clamped down on Arne's shoulder, pushing him hard. "Run," he hissed. They sprang to their feet just as the Viking lunged forward, shouting something in his harsh language. The dog leapt over the log, teeth bared, but Arn and Einar were already crashing through the underbrush, branches snapping under their boots. The forest erupted with noise, shouting voices, barking dogs, the pounding of feet behind them. Arn ran harder than he ever had, his breath tearing at his chest. Leaves whipped his face, and roots caught his feet, but he didn't dare slow down. Einar was just ahead, weaving through the trees with quick, desperate movements. The horn sounded again, echoing through the night, calling more hunters to the chase. "They're right behind us." Arn gasped, glancing back. Through the trees, he could see the flicker of torchlight, closer than before. The Vikings were gaining, their dogs pulling hard at their leashes. "Keep moving," Einar shouted back. They plunged deeper into the woods, the darkness swallowing them. The moon was hidden now behind thick clouds, making it harder to see. Arn nearly tripped more than once, catching himself on tree trunks to stay upright. Suddenly, Einar veered sharply to the right, pulling Arn with him. This way, they scrambled down a steep slope, sliding on loose dirt and leaves. At the bottom, they stumbled into another stream, wider and deeper than the first. Without hesitation, Einar splashed into the icy water. "Get in," he ordered. "We'll lose them in here." Arn waded in, the freezing water biting into his legs like knives. They moved quickly, keeping low as they followed the stream's path. The water rushed past their knees, carrying leaves and broken twigs downstream. Behind them, the shouts grew louder. A torchlight flickered at the top of the slope. "They'll see us," Arn whispered, panic rising. "Not if we stay down." Einar crouched lower, almost crawling through the water now. "Keep going." They pushed forward, the current dragging at their legs. Arne's body felt numb from the cold, his fingers stiff and clumsy. But the sound of the dogs kept him moving. Minutes felt like hours as they followed the stream, slipping on rocks and struggling to stay quiet. Gradually, the shouts began to fade again, the torches no longer visible through the trees. When they finally stopped, both of them collapsed against a large rock near the edge of the stream, gasping for air. Einar wiped the water from his face, his breath coming in sharp bursts. "I think we lost them for now." Arn sat back, his entire body trembling from cold and exhaustion. His hands were red and raw, his legs stiff from the freezing water. But even in the relief of the moment, he knew it wasn't over. The Vikings wouldn't give up that easily. Einar seemed to be thinking the same thing. "We need to keep moving," he said after a moment. "We can't stay in one place too long. They'll circle back and search again." Arn nodded weakly, though his body screamed in protest. "Where to?" Einar glanced up at the dark forest ahead. "If we keep following the stream, it should lead to the hills. There are caves there, or so I've heard. If we can reach them, we might have a place to hide until the search dies down." Arn didn't know if caves would save them, but it was better than standing still. They pushed themselves up again, forcing their stiff legs to move. Every step felt heavier, but they followed the stream, the forest growing quieter as they left the sounds of the search behind. The night stretched on, the cold gnawing at their bones. Arnie's mind wandered as they walked, exhaustion blurring his thoughts. He thought of his sister again, of the stars they used to look at together. He wondered if she would even recognize him now, with his torn clothes and hollow face. At one point, Einar stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Arn froze, his heart jumping. "What is it?" he whispered. Einar's eyes scanned the trees, his expression tense. "I thought I heard something." They stood still, listening. The forest was silent, only the soft rush of the stream breaking the quiet. After a long moment, Einar shook his head. "Maybe nothing, but we can't take chances. Keep moving." They continued on, slower now, their ears straining for any sign of danger. Finally, after what felt like forever, the trees began to thin, giving way to rocky ground. The stream curved sharply around a cluster of boulders, and beyond them, the land rose steeply. Einar's face brightened slightly. "The hills," he said. "We're close." They climbed the slope carefully, using roots and rocks for support. The ground was slippery, and Arn nearly lost his footing more than once, but Einar caught his arm each time, pulling him forward. At the top, they crouched behind a large boulder, scanning the area. The hills stretched out ahead, dark and uneven, with patches of mist clinging to the rocks. Einar pointed to a narrow gap between two large stones. "There, that might lead to a cave." They moved toward it quickly, staying low. Every sound still made Arn tense, but for now, there was no sign of pursuit. When they reached the gap, Einar pushed through first, squeezing between the rocks. Arn followed, the space tight and cold, the stones scraping against his arms. On the other side, the ground opened into a small hollow. It wasn't much, a shallow cave, barely more than a dip in the rock, but it was enough to shield them from view. Einar sank against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. "We'll rest here, just for a little while." Arn sat beside him, leaning his head back against the cold stone. His entire body ached, but for the first time since they escaped, he allowed himself to breathe. Silence settled over them, broken only by the distant whisper of wind through the rocks. But just as Arnie's eyes began to close, a sound cut through the quiet, a soft crunch of footsteps outside the cave. Einar's eyes snapped open. He grabbed Arnie's arm, his face pale. The footsteps stopped right outside the entrance, and then a low voice spoke in the Viking tongue, followed by the unmistakable sound of a sword being drawn. The sword's hiss, as it left its scabbard, felt louder than the wind. Arnie's breath caught in his throat, his body stiff against the cold rock. Einar pressed a finger to his lips, his eyes locked on the narrow cave entrance. The two of them didn't dare move. The footsteps shifted slightly, crunching against gravel as whoever it was circled the entrance slowly. Arn tried to make himself as small as possible, pulling his knees tighter to his chest. The shallow cave felt too open, like the walls were closing in but still couldn't hide them well enough. The Viking outside muttered something in a low voice. Arn couldn't understand all of it, but a few words stood out, thrall tracks close. He swallowed hard. They were hunting specifically for them. Einar's jaw tightened, his expression hard. His fingers twitched as if he were ready to spring, but Arn grabbed his arm, shaking his head slightly. Fighting now would be suicide. They had no weapons, no strength left to win against even one Viking warrior. The footsteps paused right at the entrance. Arn could see the faint shadow of the man's boots where the moonlight spilled through the gap. He prayed silently that the man wouldn't step closer. But the Viking crouched, lowering himself to look inside. Einar's breath hitched. Arnie's heart hammered so hard he thought the sound might echo against the stone walls. Then, before the man could lean farther in, another voice called out from somewhere outside. A different Viking, shouting something urgent. The man at the entrance hesitated, straightening slightly. The second voice barked another command, sharper this time. The Viking at the cave growled in frustration, but finally turned, his footsteps moving away quickly. Arn let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Einar slumped slightly against the wall, his body still tense, listening to the sound of retreating steps. When the forest outside grew quiet again, Einar whispered, "That was too close." Arn nodded, still frozen in place. Why didn't he look deeper? He was right there. Maybe he thought we kept running, Einar said. Or maybe something else caught their attention. Arn didn't like the way he said that, but he didn't ask. He was too tired, too shaken to push for answers. They stayed silent for several minutes, making sure no one was coming back. The wind howled faintly outside, carrying the smell of damp earth and pine. Finally, Einar spoke again, quieter now. "We can't stay here long. They'll sweep this area again by morning. If they find this place, we're dead." Arn pressed his hands to his face, trying to calm his racing heart. "I don't even know where we're going anymore. How far can we run before they stop chasing us?" Einar looked at him, his expression grim. "As far as it takes. Thralls don't get second chances, Arn. Once they have you, you're theirs until you die. Escaping isn't just running away. It's saying you're worth more than they think. And they don't forgive that." The words hung in the cold air, heavy and bitter. Arn thought of the settlement again, of the way the Vikings had looked at them like animals. He had seen other thralls beaten for dropping tools, others whipped just for being too slow. There was no mercy in that life. He leaned his head back against the rock, staring at the jagged ceiling. "I wasn't supposed to be here. I had a farm, a family. I didn't even fight them. I just lost." Einar's face softened slightly, though his eyes stayed hard. "You're not the only one. I had a wife, a son. They took me when I was out hunting, sold me like cattle. That's what we are to them. Cattle." Arnie's chest tightened. "What happened to them? Your family?" Einar didn't answer right away. His gaze shifted to the dark entrance of the cave, as if the shadows held the memory. "I don't know. Maybe they're alive. Maybe not. I stopped thinking about it, because it makes you weak if you hope too much. But you're still young. You can't let go of it yet, can you?" Arn didn't respond, but Einar already knew the answer. Silence stretched between them for a while. Outside, the forest creaked in the wind. After some time, Arn spoke again, his voice quieter. "Do you think there's anywhere we can go where they won't follow?" Einar shrugged, his face unreadable. "There are places, farther south, maybe even east. Some villages hate the Vikings as much as we do. But getting there, that's the hard part. We don't know the land, and we have no food, no weapons. Every step we take is a gamble." Arn pulled his knees closer, his hands trembling slightly from the cold. "I'll take the gamble. I can't go back." Einar gave a small, almost approving nod. "Good, because going back isn't an option. They'd make an example out of us." Arn didn't ask what that meant. He had seen enough of Viking punishments to imagine it. The night dragged on slowly, their exhaustion pulling at them, but neither dared fall fully asleep. Every sound outside made Arn tense, every rustle of leaves making him wonder if another warrior had come back to search. At one point, he thought he heard a distant horn again, but it might have just been the wind playing tricks on him. The cave felt colder as the night deepened, the stone walls damp with mist. Arnie's thoughts drifted between memories of home and the gnawing fear of what was coming next. Einar stayed awake most of the time, his eyes scanning the entrance. His posture was still tense, his jaw clenched. It was clear that even he didn't trust their luck to last. Finally, just before dawn, the first faint gray light crept into the cave. Einar shifted, his expression hardening again. "We leave as soon as it's bright enough to see. They'll search harder once the sun's up." Arn nodded, his body aching with fatigue. He wanted nothing more than to sleep for hours, to feel safe even for a moment. But safety was a luxury that didn't exist for thralls who ran. As the sky lightened slowly outside, Arn couldn't help but glance toward the cave entrance again. He had the strange feeling that someone was still out there, waiting, and far away, carried faintly on the morning wind, came the unmistakable sound of dogs barking again. The morning light crept slowly into the forest, pale and thin, washing the hills in a cold gray glow. The cave that had hidden them through the night now felt exposed. Every shadow seemed sharper, every sound more dangerous in the quiet dawn. Einar rose first, stretching his stiff legs with a soft groan. His clothes were still damp from the stream, his beard matted from the long night. "We can't wait any longer," he said, keeping his voice low. "They're still out there, and dogs don't give up." Arn pushed himself up, his body aching from exhaustion. His back throbbed from the rough work he had endured as a thrall, and his arms still bore the faint marks of the iron shackles. He rubbed at his wrists absently, feeling the phantom weight of the chains. "Where do we go now?" Einar scanned the hills beyond the cave, his sharp eyes narrowing. "South, like I said. If we stay in these hills, they'll corner us. But if we can reach the old trade paths, maybe we'll find travelers or even a farm willing to help us." Arn frowned. Would anyone help us? They'd risk the Vikings coming after them. "Some might," Einar replied after a moment. "Not everyone bows to the Norsemen. There are villages that hate them, ones that hide runaways when they can. But getting there, that's the real fight." The thought gave Arn a flicker of hope, but it was thin, fragile. He glanced toward the cave entrance. The forest beyond looked still, but the memory of barking dogs and flashing torches clung to him like a shadow. They stepped out into the morning air, cautiously, keeping low. The forest smelled of wet earth and pine, and a soft mist curled around the rocks. Arnie's eyes darted to every movement, every bird taking flight, every rustle of leaves. They moved quietly, sticking close to the rocks for cover. Einar led, his movements careful and deliberate. Arn followed, his mind racing with questions he didn't dare ask. The silence stretched between them as they descended the slope. Arn couldn't stop thinking about the life they had left behind, the settlement, the thralls, the harsh overseers. He thought of the other slaves who had watched them leave, their faces blank, too beaten down to even hope for escape. "What do you think will happen to the others?" Arn asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Einar glanced back at him briefly. "Nothing good. When a thrall runs, the others get punished for it. The Vikings don't care if they had nothing to do with it. They just need to make an example." Arn felt guilt twist in his chest. He pictured the old man who had worked beside him in the fields, the quiet woman who had carried water every morning, the children who were too small to row but still too young to be free. They would suffer now because he and Einar had run. Einar must have seen the look on his face because he added, "Don't waste time feeling guilty. They were suffering before we left, and they'll suffer whether we're there or not. The only way this ends is if we survive." Arn didn't respond. The truth of it hurt more than he wanted to admit. They pushed deeper into the hills, the forest thinning slightly as the sun climbed higher. The light didn't bring warmth, it only made them feel more exposed. As they walked, Einar began speaking again, his voice low, as if talking kept his mind sharp. "You know how they see us, don't you? Thralls aren't just slaves. We're property, tools. If you break, they throw you away. If you fight back, they kill you. But if you're strong enough, if you're useful, they keep you until you're too old to work." Arn glanced at him. "You've seen it before?" Einar gave a bitter laugh. "I've lived it. The first master I had, he treated his thralls like animals. If someone collapsed in the field, he'd have them dragged out and left in the woods. Said wolves were cheaper than digging graves." Arn shivered at the thought. He had seen cruelty, but hearing it spoken so plainly made his stomach turn. Why do they even keep so many of us? They have their own people. Why not just do the work themselves? "Because thralls are easier," Einar said simply. "A free man demands payment. A thrall just works until he dies. And the Vikings trade us like coin, one thrall for silver or for tools or for favor with another clan. Some thralls are born into it. They've never known anything else. That's what they want, to make us forget we were ever free. The words settled over Arn heavily. He clenched his fists, feeling the rough calluses on his hands, the scars from the oars, the marks of ownership he hadn't chosen. They stopped briefly near a cluster of rocks, crouching low as Einar scanned the area ahead. The path dipped into a narrow ravine, the rocks slick with morning dew. Einar gestured for Arn to wait, moving ahead a few steps to check the path. Arn stayed behind, his eyes darting to every shadow. The forest was quiet, too quiet. And then, faintly, carried on the wind, came the sound of a horn. Einar froze, turning sharply toward Arn. Their eyes met, and they didn't need to speak. The Vikings were close again. "Move," Einar whispered sharply, motioning for Arn to follow. They scrambled down the ravine, their boots slipping on wet stones. The horn sounded again, louder this time, followed by distant barking. "They're tracking us again," Arn said, his voice tight with panic. Einar didn't look back. "Then we don't stop. Not for anything." They ran now, weaving through the narrow path, their breath ragged in the cold air. Arnie's legs burned with every step, but fear pushed him forward. As they rounded a sharp bend, Einar slowed suddenly, raising a hand. Arn nearly collided with him. Ahead, at the far end of the ravine, stood a figure. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in furs, stood blocking the path. His face was shadowed, but the glint of an axe in his hand caught the sunlight. Einar tensed instantly, his body shifting into a defensive stance. "Not good," he muttered. Arnie's heart pounded. "Is he alone?" Einar's eyes scanned the rocks, searching for movement. Maybe, or maybe he's waiting for the others to catch up. The man didn't move, just stood there silently, watching them. And then, slowly, he lifted the axe, resting it against his shoulder. Einar's jaw tightened. "We can't go back, and we can't fight him like this." Arn swallowed hard, his mind racing. "Then what do we do?" The man took a step forward, his boots crunching against the stones. Einar glanced at Arn briefly, his expression grim. "We wait for him to make the first move." The silence stretched, heavy and tense, as the stranger stared at them, the axe glinting in the pale morning light. The man stood unmoving, his figure framed by the gray morning mist. His axe caught the light again as he shifted it lazily in his hand, as though he had all the time in the world. He didn't charge, didn't call for others. He just watched them, his expression unreadable. Einar kept his body low, his stance tense. "He's waiting," he murmured under his breath. Arnie's heart pounded against his ribs. "Waiting for what?" Einar's eyes narrowed. "For us to decide. He's either a hunter or someone who doesn't want to waste his energy chasing us if we're too stupid to run into him." The man finally spoke, his voice deep and rough, carrying easily in the cold air. Arn couldn't understand every word, but he caught a few that made his stomach turn. "Thrall, runaways, worth." "He knows who we are," Arn whispered. "Of course he does," Einar replied. His grip tightened on the rock he was crouched behind, as if he were ready to throw it if he had to. "The question is whether he's here for the bounty or for sport." The man took another step forward, slow and deliberate. His boots crunched on the loose stones, the sound echoing slightly in the ravine. His eyes, sharp, pale, and cold, never left them. Arn felt like prey caught in the open. The silence between them stretched until it felt unbearable. Then, without warning, the man tilted his head slightly and said something else, short, sharp, like a command. Einar's face hardened. "He wants us to come closer," he muttered. Arn stared at him. "Are you insane?" "We're not going to." Einar cut him off with a glance. "I didn't say we would. I'm saying he's trying to control what we do, which means he's alone, or at least not close enough to call for help without risking us slipping away." "Are you sure?" "No," Einar admitted, "but we don't have a choice. If we turn back, we run straight into the men and dogs behind us. If we go forward, maybe, just maybe, we can get past them before they catch up." Arnie's chest tightened. "How?" "He's got an axe." Einar's eyes flicked to the rocks above them. "If we move fast and keep him guessing, we might find a way past. But if he's not alone," he didn't finish the thought. The man shifted his weight, his grip tightening slightly on the axe handle. Einar gave Arn a sharp nod. "On my word," we move. Stay low, don't hesitate. If we freeze, we're dead. Arnie's breath came fast, his palms sweating despite the cold. And if we don't make it? Einar didn't answer. He just counted under his breath. 1, 2 now. They lunged forward, sprinting along the ravine's edge. Stones scattered under their boots, slipping dangerously on the wet surface. The man raised his axe instantly, stepping forward to block their path. Einar grabbed a loose rock from the ground and hurled it as hard as he could. It struck the man's shoulder with a dull thud, making him stumble for half a second. Go! Einar shouted. Arn pushed himself faster, darting to the left to try to slip past. The man recovered quickly. Swinging the axe in a wide arc, Arn felt the wind of it brush past his arm as he ducked, heart hammering. Einar rushed in close, not to fight, but to distract, darting to the other side of the path. Keep running, he yelled. Arn didn't look back. He scrambled over a cluster of rocks, nearly slipping as he pulled himself up. His lungs burned, and every muscle screamed in protest, but he forced himself forward. Behind him, he heard the clash of movement, Einar grunting as he dodged another swing. Don't stop. Einar's voice was sharp, commanding. Arn climbed higher, pulling himself onto a narrow ledge. He glanced back just once. The man was focused on Einar now. Swinging the axe again in a heavy arc, Einar ducked low, darting around the rocks to keep out of reach. Arn hesitated, torn. Einar caught his eye and shouted, Go! I'll find you. The words cut through him, but there was no time to argue. Arn turned and ran, slipping down the other side of the rocks. His boots skidded on the wet stones, but he managed to keep his balance, crashing through a patch of low shrubs. The forest opened slightly ahead, the hills sloping downward. He didn't stop to think, just kept running, his breath ragged, his chest tight. Behind him, the sound of shouting grew louder. The dogs were closer again now, their barks echoing through the hills. Arnie's legs felt like they would give out, but fear drove him forward. He darted through a cluster of trees, the branches clawing at his face and arms. The ground sloped sharply downward again, and he half slid, half ran down, stumbling more than once. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, leaning against a tree, the silence hit him like a weight. No footsteps behind him, no sound of Einar. Arn looked back, his chest heaving. The path behind him was empty. Einar, he whispered, his voice hoarse. The forest didn't answer. For the first time since they escaped, Arn felt the crushing weight of being alone. He wanted to turn back, to find him, but the horns sounded again in the distance, sharper this time. The dog barked louder, closer. Arn clenched his fists, torn between running and staying. His mind raced with images of Einar, dodging the axe, shouting for him to keep going. He wanted to believe Einar had escaped too, but doubt gnawed at him. Forcing himself to move, Arn pushed forward again, deeper into the forest. Every step felt heavier now, every sound sharper. As he moved farther from the ravine, the forest grew thicker, darker. The sunlight barely broke through the dense canopy, and the air felt colder here. Arn slowed slightly, his ears straining for any sound of pursuit. Then, faintly, he heard something else, different from the barking dogs or the horns. It was soft, rhythmic, almost like chanting. He froze, turning his head toward the sound. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods, hidden among the trees. For a moment, he wondered if he was imagining it, just exhaustion playing tricks on his mind. But the sound grew clearer, a low murmur that rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Arn took a cautious step toward it, curiosity warring with fear. Who would be chanting out here, in the middle of nowhere, and more importantly, friend or foe? The chanting grew louder as Arn moved closer, his steps slow and careful. Each sound of his foot against the damp forest floor felt too loud, echoing in his own ears. He ducked under low branches, keeping close to the trees for cover. The air here felt different, heavier somehow. The forest thickened, and a strange smell, something earthy mixed with smoke, hung in the air. Arnie's heart pounded, his thoughts racing. He knew he should keep running, keep putting distance between himself and the Vikings, but something about the chanting pulled him forward. He crept closer until the trees opened slightly, revealing a small clearing. At first, he thought his tired mind was playing tricks on him. There, in the middle of the clearing, stood 3 figures in dark, heavy cloaks. A small fire burned low between them, sending thin tendrils of smoke curling into the air. Strange symbols had been carved into the dirt around the fire, lines and circles that Arn didn't recognize. The figures spoke in low voices, the rhythmic chanting rising and falling with the crackle of the flames. He couldn't understand the words, but they felt old, like they didn't belong to the Viking tongue or any language he knew. Arn crouched lower, hiding behind a thick bush. His mind spun with questions. Who were they? Vikings? Thralls? Or something else entirely? One of the figures turned slightly, and in the flickering firelight, Arn caught a glimpse of a woman's face beneath the hood. Her skin was pale, marked with faint lines of dark paint, and her eyes glinted with something unreadable. Einar's words echoed in his mind. Some villages hate the Vikings as much as we do. Were these people among them? Or were they worse? The woman spoke something to the others, and they all fell silent. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hiss of the fire. Then, as if sensing something, she looked toward the trees, directly toward where Arn crouched. Arn froze, holding his breath. The woman stared for a long moment before turning back to the others, whispering something in a tone too soft to catch. The chanting started again, louder now, more urgent. Arn backed away slowly, careful not to snap a branch or rustle a leaf. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to get as far away from this strange gathering as possible. But just as he turned to slip away, a twig snapped under his boot. The chanting stopped instantly. The woman's head whipped toward him again, her sharp eyes narrowing. One of the other cloaked figures rose to their feet, the firelight catching the edge of something metallic in their hand. Arn didn't wait to see what it was. He bolted, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping against his arms and face. Behind him, voices rose, shouting now instead of chanting. He didn't understand the words, but the tone was urgent, commanding. The forest blurred around him as he ran, his legs burning. For a moment, he wondered if he had just run straight into another trap. He didn't stop until the chanting voices faded behind him, replaced once again by the distant barks of dogs. Arn slowed, gasping for air, leaning against a tree. His chest heaved, his mind spinning with what he had just seen. Who were those people? Were they allies of the Vikings or enemies? And why were they performing some strange ritual in the middle of the forest? The questions swirled in his head, but there was no time to think. The horn sounded again, closer now. Arn pushed himself forward, forcing his aching legs to keep moving. The forest thinned slightly, giving way to rougher ground. Large rocks jutted from the earth, and the trees stood farther apart. He moved carefully now, trying to stay quiet. As he climbed over a fallen log, a sound made him stop. Voices, not chanting this time, but talking, 2 men speaking in low tones. Arn crouched, staying hidden. The voices grew clearer as he crept closer. He recognized the Viking tongue immediately, harsh and sharp. He couldn't understand everything, but he caught words that made his stomach twist. Thralls, runaway, reward. Peering through the branches, he saw them. 2 Vikings sitting near a small stream, resting against a pair of boulders. One was sharpening his sword, the other eating from a leather pouch. Their spears leaned against the rocks beside them, and a dog slept curled near their feet. Arnie's pulse quickened. If they were here, the others couldn't be far. He glanced around quickly, searching for another way forward. The stream cut through the rocks, leading deeper into the hills, but it meant crossing open ground where they could easily see him. The dog stirred slightly, lifting its head. Arn froze, praying it wouldn't catch his scent. The men continued talking, laughing quietly about something, but Arn stayed crouched, not daring to move. His mind raced with options. He could wait until they moved on, but every moment wasted risked the others catching up. Then, faintly, he thought he heard something else, soft footsteps behind him, careful and deliberate. Arnie's heart jumped. He turned his head slightly, trying to see without making a sound. For a brief moment, he caught sight of a figure moving between the trees. Someone small, quick, slipping from shadow to shadow. His breath caught in his throat. Was it one of the cloaked figures from the clearing? Or another Viking scout? The figure moved closer, crouching low, its face hidden by the hood of a dark cloak. The dog lifted its head fully now, sniffing the air. One of the Vikings looked up, frowning. Arn didn't know what to do. If the dog barked, they'd find him, and maybe the hooded figure too. The cloaked stranger moved again, silent and sure, slipping behind a tree just a few feet from where Arn hid. For a brief second, their eyes met. Arn felt a chill run through him. Whoever this was, they weren't just another thrall or villager. Their eyes were sharp, focused, like they already knew exactly who he was. The dog growled, standing now, its ears pricked forward. The Vikings turned, their hands going to their weapons. The stranger raised a finger to their lips, signaling Arn to stay silent. And then, in one swift motion, the cloaked figure moved. The cloaked figure moved like a shadow, slipping between the trees in one smooth motion. Before the Vikings could react, the stranger hurled a stone across the stream. It struck a tree with a loud crack, echoing through the woods. The dog barked immediately, lunging toward the sound. One of the Vikings cursed, grabbing its leash and pulling it back. The other stood quickly, scanning the trees in the wrong direction, his hand gripping his sword. The stranger glanced at Arn, their expression unreadable under the hood, and gestured sharply toward the rocks. It was a clear signal. Go now. Arn hesitated for half a second, his body frozen between fear and instinct. But when the second Viking moved toward the noise, distracted, Arn pushed himself low to the ground and slipped along the edge of the rocks. He stayed crouched, his breath held tight, careful not to snap a single twig. The Vikings were focused on the far side of the clearing, arguing in sharp voices about whether they should investigate the sound. Arn crawled past the boulders, his heart pounding so hard he thought it would give him away. The stream's water was cold against his boots as he splashed through quickly, staying hidden by the larger stones. Once he was clear, he glanced back. The cloaked stranger was still there, crouched in the shadows, watching him. For a brief moment, their eyes met again, and then the figure slipped away, vanishing into the trees as silently as they had appeared. Arn didn't have time to wonder who they were. He pushed forward, forcing himself deeper into the forest, his chest tight with panic. The horns sounded again in the distance, followed by more barking dogs. The Vikings near the stream shouted something, their voices rising, and he knew they had realized too late that they had been tricked. Arn didn't look back. The forest grew denser again, branches catching his sleeves as he moved. His legs burned with every step, and his lungs felt raw from running. But he couldn't stop, not with the horns growing louder, not with the thought of Einar still echoing in his mind. He didn't know if Einar was alive. The image of his friend facing that axe-wielding man haunted him with every step. The ground sloped upward sharply, the trees thinning slightly as the hills rose. He stumbled over rocks, nearly falling more than once, but he forced himself to keep climbing. Finally, when his legs felt like they would give out, he reached a narrow ridge. From there, he could see the valley below, the stream winding through the forest, smoke rising faintly from a distant Viking camp. He crouched low, scanning the area carefully. There was no sign of movement nearby, but the sounds of horns and dogs still carried through the air, bouncing off the rocks. Arn leaned against a tree, trying to catch his breath. His mind raced with everything that had happened in the last hours. The chase, the strange, chanting figures, the hooded stranger who had helped him. It all felt like too much, too fast. Who were they, and why had they helped him? He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heart still pounding. Part of him wanted to believe the cloaked stranger was part of a resistance, someone who hated the Vikings and risked helping runaways. But another part of him whispered a darker thought. Maybe they had their own reasons, ones that had nothing to do with saving him. The Vikings weren't the only danger in these lands. He had heard rumors whispered by thralls at night, rumors of groups who hid in the woods, taking people for their own dark purposes. Some said they traded escaped thralls back to the Vikings for silver. Others said they used them for strange rituals, offering them to the old gods. Arn pushed the thoughts away, but they lingered at the back of his mind. A soft sound snapped him from his thoughts. Leaves rustled nearby, just beyond the ridge. He tensed instantly, dropping lower behind the tree. His eyes scanned the woods, searching for movement. The rustling grew closer, careful and deliberate, not the random movement of an animal. Arn gripped a loose rock, holding it tight in his trembling hand. He didn't know what good it would do, but it was better than nothing. The footsteps stopped. Arn. The voice was low, rough but familiar. Arnie's eyes widened. Einar. From between the trees, Einar stepped into view, his face pale and drawn, his clothes torn. He moved stiffly like every step hurt, but he was alive. Arn stood quickly, relief flooding through him. You're alive, I thought. Einar raised a hand, cutting him off. His eyes darted around the trees, sharp and cautious. Keep your voice down. They're still searching. Arn moved closer, his eyes scanning Einar's face. What happened? Did you kill him? Einar shook his head. No, I didn't have to. Someone distracted him long enough for me to get away. Arn frowned. Somewhat. Einar gave him a sharp look. Did you see them too? Arn nodded. A cloaked stranger. They helped me escape the Vikings near the stream. Einar's jaw tightened. Then we need to move. Now. Arn blinked. Why? They helped us. Einar grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the ridge. You don't know why they helped us. No one risks angering the Vikings without a reason. And people like that, they don't help for free. Arn followed, his heart sinking. You think they're dangerous? Einar didn't answer right away, moving quickly through the trees. I've heard stories. There are groups in these woods who hate the Vikings, yes. But they hate everyone else just as much. Some of them think thralls make good bargaining chips. Others do worse. Arn felt a chill despite the running. But if they wanted to catch me, they could have. They let me go. Maybe, Einar said. Or maybe they're waiting, watching to see where we run. The thought made Arnie's stomach twist. He glanced back toward the trees, half expecting to see a hooded figure standing in the shadows. But the forest was empty, the only sound their footsteps crunching softly against the damp ground. Einar led them deeper into the hills, moving quickly despite his injuries. Arn followed, his mind swirling with questions he couldn't ask. As the sun climbed higher, the forest began to feel heavier again, the air thick with tension. Every shadow felt like a pair of eyes watching. At one point, Arn thought he saw movement in the distance, a flicker of dark cloth slipping behind a tree. But when he looked again, there was nothing. The horns sounded again, farther away now, but still too close for comfort. They didn't stop until the light began to fade again, the sun dipping low behind the hills. Einar finally slowed, leaning against a rock, his breath ragged. We'll rest for a moment, but not long. Arn sat beside him, his legs aching, his mind racing. For a while, neither of them spoke, the quiet broken only by the distant cry of crows. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the forest, came a sound that made Arnie's skin crawl. The chanting again. The chanting rose and fell in the distance, carried on the cold, evening wind. It was faint, but it sent a shiver crawling up Arnie's spine. Einar's head turned sharply toward the sound, his face tightening. They're closer than before, Arn whispered, his voice trembling. Einar scanned the darkening forest, his jaw set. They're moving. Following us, maybe. Arn swallowed hard, glancing around nervously. The trees felt heavier now, leaning inward as if the whole forest were listening. The sky above had deepened to a dull orange, and shadows stretched long across the ground. Do you think it's them? Arn asked, his words barely audible. Einar didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the direction of the sound, his expression grim. It's them, he said finally. And if they're chanting, it means they're not hunting the Vikings. They're hunting something else. Us. Einar didn't look at him. Maybe. Or maybe they're hunting anyone they find out here. Either way, we don't stay still. Arn nodded quickly, rising to his feet. His legs felt like lead, but fear pushed him forward. They moved again, slipping deeper into the woods, staying low, their steps careful. The chanting continued in the distance, sometimes fading, sometimes growing louder, like it was circling them. Arnie's chest tightened with every step. Why would they chant like that? What are they doing? Einar's jaw clenched. I don't know, but I've heard stories. Groups like this, some of them think they can call on the old gods to curse the Vikings, to drive them away. But those same groups don't care who gets caught in the middle. Thralls, villagers, anyone they can use is just another piece of their ritual. Arnie's stomach twisted. You mean they'd... He couldn't even finish the thought. Einar glanced at him, his expression grim. That's why we keep moving. The forest thickened again, the trees crowding together as the last light faded. The air grew colder, damp with mist rising from the ground. Arnie's hands trembled slightly as he pushed branches aside, his breath coming in quick bursts. The sound of horns had faded, replaced now entirely by the low hum of chanting. At one point, Einar stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Arn froze beside him, his eyes darting around. Einar crouched low, motioning for Arn to follow. Voices, he whispered. They crept forward carefully, staying low to the ground. Through the trees, Arn saw movement, torches glowing faintly in the distance, figures moving slowly between the trunks. There were more of them this time. At least 6, maybe more, all cloaked, their faces hidden in the shadows. Some carried staffs carved with strange markings. Others held small bundles that swung gently as they walked. The chanting was louder now, rising and falling with their steps. Arnie's heart pounded. They're looking for us, he whispered. Einar shook his head slightly. They're not just looking, they're hurting. Arn frowned. What do you mean? Einar's eyes stayed locked on the figures. They're moving in a pattern, pushing anything in the forest toward a certain point. They don't care if it's us, a deer, or one of the Vikings. They're driving everything closer to wherever they want it. The thought made Arnie's skin crawl. Einar glanced at him. We need to go the opposite way. Now, they moved quickly, slipping back into the thicker part of the forest, careful not to draw attention. But the chanting followed, changing slightly now, the rhythm shifting. They know we're moving, Einar muttered, his voice tight. Arn glanced back, his chest tightening with panic. Are they following us, or just closing in? Einar didn't answer, but the look on his face told Arn enough. The forest began to slope downward again, the ground uneven with rocks and roots. Arn stumbled more than once, catching himself on trees as they moved. Then, without warning, a torchlight flared to their right. Arn froze instantly, his breath catching. A cloaked figure stood just a few paces away, half hidden in the shadows, holding a torch high. Their head turned slowly toward them. Einar grabbed Arnie's arm, pulling him sharply behind a cluster of trees. The figure tilted their head slightly, as if listening. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then the figure let out a short, sharp call. 3 quick sounds, almost like a bird's cry. The chanting in the distance shifted again, louder, faster. They found us, Einar said under his breath. Run. They bolted, crashing through the trees, not caring about noise anymore. The chanting rose behind them, voices overlapping now, strange and sharp. Torches flickered in the distance as more figures moved through the woods. Arnie's lungs burned, his legs screaming with every step, but fear kept him moving. The forest blurred around him, branches tearing at his clothes, roots catching at his boots. The chanting grew louder, closer, and Arn could feel it in his chest like a heavy drumbeat. They burst through a dense patch of trees and stumbled into another clearing. The ground here was uneven, scattered with stones and patches of moss. Einar stopped suddenly, his eyes darting around. Arn turned, confused. Why are we stopping? Einar pointed to the far side of the clearing. Look! Arn followed his gaze, and his breath caught. Across the clearing stood a massive stone, weathered and ancient, carved with strange runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Around its base were remnants of old fires, blackened stones arranged in a circle. This is where they're hurting everything, Einar said, his voice grim. This is their ritual site. Arnie's stomach twisted. We have to get away from here. Einar nodded, but before they could move, movement caught Arnie's eye. From the far side of the clearing, more cloaked figures emerged, their torches flickering as they stepped into the open. The chanting grew louder, echoing strangely off the stones, making the air feel heavier, thicker. Einar grabbed Arnie's arm, pulling him back toward the trees, but another torchlight flared to their left. More figures were closing in, moving quickly now, their faces still hidden by their hoods. "We're surrounded," Arn whispered, panic rising in his voice. Einar's jaw tightened. His eyes darted around, scanning for any gap, any escape. Not yet. There's always a way out. But as the chanting grew louder, as more figures stepped into the clearing, Arn felt his hopes slipping. The cloaked figures moved closer, their voices rising in a strange, rhythmic song. The glowing runes on the stone pulsed faintly, as if answering their chant. Arn took a step back, his heart hammering. Einar's grip tightened on his arm. "Stay close. Whatever happens, don't let them take you alive." Arn stared at him, fear gripping his chest. "What do you mean?" Einar didn't answer. His eyes stayed locked on the closing figures, his body tensed like a trapped animal ready to strike. The chanting reached a fevered pitch, the air humming with strange energy. And then, as the first of the cloaked figures stepped fully into the clearing, their hoods slipping slightly to reveal a pale, painted face, Arn finally saw their eyes. Cold, focused, and looking directly at him. The air felt heavier with every passing second, thick with smoke from the torches and a strange rhythm of chanting that now pulsed like a heartbeat. The clearing glowed in the flickering orange light, shadows stretching long across the moss-covered stones. The runes carved into the massive stone seemed to shimmer faintly, as though alive, as though they were responding to the voices surrounding it. Arnie's breath came fast and shallow. His hands trembled at his sides, his mind screaming at him to run, but his legs felt frozen. Every cloaked figure stepped closer in unison, moving with a strange, deliberate rhythm that made his skin crawl. Einar stayed beside him, his body tense, his jaw tight. His eyes darted from side to side, counting the figures, looking for any opening. "There are too many," he muttered under his breath. "They're closing us in." Arn swallowed hard, his voice shaking. "What do they want with us?" Einar's eyes flicked to the glowing stone, then back to the figures. "Whatever they're doing here, it doesn't end well for anyone they catch." The chanting shifted, rising and falling in sharp bursts. Two of the cloaked figures broke from the circle and stepped closer, their painted faces catching the light. The pale streaks across their cheeks looked almost like scars in the flicker of the fire. One of them spoke, their voice low and calm, but filled with authority. The words were in an old tongue, one didn't fully understand, but a few were familiar. Thrall, sacrifice, freedom. Arnie's stomach turned. "Sacrifice," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Einar heard him. His jaw tightened, his hand clenching into a fist. "Not us. Not if we fight." The figure who had spoken took another step forward, lifting a staff carved with more of those strange symbols. The top of it was wrapped in strips of cloth, stained dark with something Arn didn't want to imagine. Another voice joined the chanting, then another, until the entire clearing thrummed with sound. The figures began to move in a slow circle around the stone, their torches leaving streaks of light as they passed. Einar grabbed Arnie's arm, pulling him slightly back toward the trees. "If we're going to run, it has to be now." Arn glanced around, panic in his chest. "Where?" "They're everywhere." Einar's eyes darted to a narrow break between two figures at the edge of the clearing. "There. We push through fast before they close it." Arnie's heart pounded. "What if they catch us?" Einar gave him a hard look. "Then we fight until we can't." The urgency in his voice left no room for argument. But before they could move, a sudden sound tore through the chanting. A sharp horn blast, distant but growing closer. The cloaked figures froze for a moment, their heads turning toward the sound. Arnie's breath caught. He knew that horn. The Vikings. Einar's face hardened. "They're coming here." The chanting started again, faster this time, almost frantic. The figures began moving quicker, their circle tightening around the stone. Arnie's pulse raced. They know the Vikings are close. What are they going to do? Einar's eyes stayed on the figures. Finish whatever they started, before anyone interrupts. The thought made Arnie's stomach twist. He could feel the tension in the air, the desperation in the cloaked group's movements. Whatever ritual they were performing, they wanted it done now, before the Vikings arrived. One of the figures stepped out of the circle again, moving toward Arn and Einar. Their painted face glowed pale in the torchlight, their sharp eyes locking onto Arnie's. They raised their staff slightly, pointing it at him. Arn froze, his body stiff. Einar stepped in front of him instinctively, his stance protective. "Back away," he growled under his breath, though the figure wouldn't understand his words. The figure said something in that same old tongue, their voice rising above the chanting. Two more figures broke from the circle, moving toward them. Arn felt panic surge through him. "They're coming for us." Einar grabbed his arm. "On my signal, we run." The figures closed in slowly, careful, as if they didn't want to startle them. But their intent was clear in their slow, sure steps. The horn sounded again, closer now, and the distant barking of dogs carried through the trees. The figures around the stone began chanting louder, faster, their movements frenzied now. The runes on the stone pulsed more brightly, the glow flickering with each word. Einar's grip tightened on Arnie's arm. "Now!" They lunged toward the gap between the two figures at the edge of the clearing. Arnie's heart pounded as they ran, their boots slipping slightly on the damp moss. One of the cloaked figures shouted, lunging toward them. Einar swung his arm out, shoving the figure aside, and they broke through the gap. The chanting rose to a near scream behind them, torches flaring brighter as the group reacted. "Run!" Einar shouted. They darted into the trees, branches clawing at their arms, the forest a blur of dark shapes and flickering light. Behind them, voices shouted and footsteps pounded against the ground as some of the cloaked figures gave chase. The horns sounded again, so close now it felt like it was just beyond the trees. The barking of dogs grew louder, sharper. Arnie's mind spun wildly. The Vikings and the cloaked figures were both closing in. There was nowhere safe to go, nowhere to hide. They crashed through a dense patch of underbrush, sliding down a slope slick with mud. Arn nearly lost his footing, but Einar caught his arm, pulling him upright. The forest opened slightly ahead, a faint glow of torchlight flickering between the trees. Einar slowed, holding Arn back. "Careful!" Arn peeked through the trees, and his breath caught. Just ahead, in another small clearing, the Vikings had arrived. At least a dozen of them, their torches blazing, their dogs straining at their leashes. They were shouting to each other, their weapons ready. Arnie's chest tightened. They were trapped between two enemies. Einar scanned the clearing quickly, his mind racing. "If we run toward the Vikings, they'll kill us. If we stay here, the cloaked ones will catch us." Arnie's voice trembled. "Then what do we do?" Before Einar could answer, a rustling sound rose behind them. The cloaked figures were close, their torches glowing faintly through the trees. The Vikings' dogs barked suddenly, straining against their leashes, pulling toward the sound. One of the Vikings shouted, pointing toward the trees. The cloaked figures were almost at their backs now, the chanting starting again, louder, faster. Einar grabbed Arnie's arm, pulling him sharply to the side. This way, they darted along the edge of the clearing, staying low, hoping neither side would notice them. But a shout rang out from behind. The cloaked figures had seen them. At the same time, one of the Viking dogs broke free of its leash, charging toward the sound. Arnie's heart raced as he and Einar ran, the forest exploding with chaos behind them. Vikings shouting, dogs barking, cloaked figures chanting louder, their voices almost screaming now. The ground sloped downward sharply again, leading to a narrow gorge. Einar didn't hesitate, sliding down the slope. Arn followed, stumbling, rocks scattering under his boots. The gorge was dark and damp, the walls high on either side. Water trickled along the bottom, and the air smelled of wet stone. They kept running, their breaths ragged, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. Then, just as they rounded a bend, Einar stopped suddenly, his eyes widening. Arn skidded to a stop beside him, his chest heaving. "What is it?" Einar didn't answer, just stared ahead. Arn followed his gaze, and his heart froze. There, at the end of the gorge, standing perfectly still in the dim light, was the cloaked stranger who had helped them before. The hooded head tilted slightly, and even from a distance, Arn could feel those sharp, unreadable eyes watching them. The stranger raised a hand slowly, as if beckoning them closer. Behind them, the shouting and chanting grew louder, echoing through the gorge. Arnie's breath caught. "Einar, what do we do?" Einar didn't move, his jaw tight, his body tense. The stranger's hand stayed raised, unmoving. And in that moment, trapped between the growing chaos behind them and the silent figure ahead, Arn felt the weight of every choice pressing down on him. The gorge felt smaller with every passing second, its stone walls closing in as the sounds of chaos grew louder behind them. The chanting of the cloaked figures mixed with the barking of dogs and the sharp Viking shouts, echoing together in a wild, frantic rhythm. The torches behind them flickered off the stone, sending strange shapes dancing along the walls. Arnie's chest heaved, his breath sharp in the cold night air. His legs felt like they might give out at any second, but fear held him upright. The cloaked stranger ahead stayed perfectly still, standing in the shallow water of the gorge, the torchlight glinting faintly against the edge of their hood. Their hand remained raised, beckoning slowly, deliberately. Einar's grip tightened on Arnie's arm. His jaw was locked, his breathing heavy. "Don't move," he whispered. Arn swallowed hard, his heart pounding. "Einar, we can't stay here. They're coming." Einar's eyes didn't leave the stranger. "We don't know what they want. Running into their hands might be worse than what's behind us." Behind them, the noises grew closer. The chanting rose to a near scream, wild and desperate, as if the cloaked figures had lost their calm. Viking horns blared again, closer now, and the barking of dogs sounded so near Arn thought he could feel the vibration of their paws against the stone. The cloaked stranger finally lowered their hand, tilting their head slightly to the side, as if curious. Then, in a slow, smooth motion, they took a single step forward. Arn stepped back instinctively, his boots splashing in the shallow water. His breath caught as the stranger stopped just a few paces away. The hood shifted slightly, and for the first time, Arn could see more of the face beneath it. Pale skin streaked with faint painted lines. Sharp eyes glinting in the dim light, studying him as if weighing a choice. The stranger spoke then, their voice low and steady, carrying clearly through the gorge despite the chaos behind them. The words were in that old tongue again, but Arn caught enough to understand. "You don't belong to them. You belong here now." Arnie's heart sank, his stomach twisting at the meaning. He looked at Einar, panic in his eyes. Einar shook his head firmly. "We're not staying." The stranger tilted their head again, almost as if amused, and took another step closer. Behind them, torches flared at the mouth of the gorge. Shadows moved fast along the walls as figures poured in. Vikings and cloaked figures alike, their chaotic shouts and chants blending into one deafening roar. The stranger turned their head slightly toward the noise, but didn't move, their focus still locked on Arn and Einar. Einar's grip tightened on Arnie's arm. "We're running." "On my mark." Arnie's chest tightened. "Where?" "There's nowhere to go." Einar's eyes scanned the gorge quickly, his mind racing. He spotted something, a narrow crack in a rock wall a few paces to their left, half hidden by vines. "There. We'll fit through if we move fast." Arn looked at the crack, doubt filling his eyes. What if it's a dead end? Einar gave him a sharp look. Better a dead end than getting caught by either of them. The stranger's head tilted slightly toward the crack, almost as if they knew what Einar was thinking. Then, suddenly, the first Viking dog broke into the gorge, its paws splashing through the water as it charged forward. A Viking shouted behind it, and more torches flared bright. The cloaked stranger's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, they moved quickly, stepping between Arn and the oncoming chaos, lifting one hand as if to block the way. Einar didn't wait. "Now!" he shouted, pulling Arn toward the crack. They splashed through the water, running as fast as they could. The stranger didn't turn to stop them, but their head moved slightly, watching them with those sharp, unreadable eyes. Arn felt the weight of that stare even as they reached the crack. He ducked inside first, pushing through the narrow space, the rough stone scraping his arms. Einar followed close behind, his movements quick and desperate. The crack was tight and dark, barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Arnie's hands scraped against jagged stone, his heart racing as he pushed forward. Behind them, the gorge exploded with noise. Vikings shouting, dogs barking, cloaked figures screaming their strange chants. The clash of metal against metal echoed through the stone as the two groups collided violently. Arn didn't look back. He pushed deeper into the narrow passage, his breaths loud in the cramped space. The crack widened slightly after a few paces, sloping upward. Faint moonlight filtered through ahead, and Arn scrambled toward it, desperate for open air. Finally, they emerged onto a ledge high above the gorge. The forest stretched below, dark and misty, the distant glow of fires flickering through the trees. Arn collapsed against a rock, gasping for air, his chest burning. Einar crouched beside him, scanning the gorge below. The scene was chaos. Vikings and cloaked figures clashed in the narrow space, torches swinging wildly. The chanting was broken now, replaced by screams and the metallic ring of swords. And in the center of it all, standing perfectly still amid the chaos, was the cloaked stranger. Arn followed Einar's gaze, his breath catching. They're not fighting. Einar's jaw tightened. No, they're watching. The stranger stood unmoving, their hood tilted slightly, as if observing the entire battle, as though none of it touched them. Then, as if sensing Arnie's eyes on them, the stranger lifted their head and looked directly toward the ledge where they hid. Arn froze, his heart pounding. Einar, they can see us. The stranger raised one hand slowly, just as they had before, and made a small, deliberate motion, beckoning again. Einar grabbed Arnie's arm, pulling him back from the ledge. Ignore it. We keep moving. Arnie's chest tightened. But where? They'll see us if we try to climb down. Einar glanced at the forest below, his jaw clenched. We'll have to risk it. We're not staying here. But before they could move, a sharp sound echoed through the gorge. A horn blast, louder than before and different from the Viking call. It was deeper, more resonant, carrying through the entire valley. The fighting below paused for a brief second, both sides looking toward the sound. Even the stranger turned their heads slightly, listening. Then the chanting started again, louder than ever, and the runes on the stone at the center of the clearing below glowed bright, casting a strange light across the gorge. Arn stepped back, his eyes wide. Einar, what are they doing? Einar didn't answer, his own eyes locked on the glowing runes. The cloaked stranger tilted their head back toward Arn and Einar, their sharp gaze catching the glow of the strange light. For a moment, their expression seemed almost certain, as if they already knew exactly how this would end. Then, slowly, deliberately, they lowered their hood. Arnie's breath caught in his chest as the pale, painted face came fully into view for the first time. And with the horns still echoing, the chanting rising, and the light from the stone spreading through the gorge, Arn felt something deep inside him twist with a single, terrifying thought. This wasn't just about running anymore. Something much bigger was about to begin. The glow from the runes bathed the gorge in a pale, ghostly light, making the water shimmer and the shadows stretch unnaturally long. The chanting rose higher, echoing against the stone walls until it felt like the entire forest was vibrating. Arn gripped the edge of the ledge, his knuckles white, his heart hammering as he stared down at the scene below. The cloaked strangers stood unmoving in the chaos, their hood now lowered fully, their painted face calm, almost serene, as though all of this madness was unfolding exactly as they had planned. Arn couldn't look away from those sharp eyes, which seemed to pierce right through him even at this distance. Einar pulled Arn back from the ledge, sharply. Don't look at them. We need to move before anyone spots us. But Arnie's body resisted, his gaze still locked on the glowing stone and the figures circling it below. Einar, what if this isn't just about us escaping? What if this is something much worse? Einar's jaw tightened, his hand gripping Arnie's arm. Then all the more reason to run. Before they could move, a new sound rose above the chanting. A deep, rhythmic pounding, like drums, but heavier, slower, almost like footsteps echoing from somewhere deeper in the gorge. The cloaked figures pause for the briefest moment, turning their heads toward the glowing stone as if waiting for something. Even the Vikings seemed frozen, their shouting faltering as the strange sound reverberated through the valley. The cloaked stranger tilted their head back toward Arnie's ledge, almost like they were silently asking, "Are you ready to see?" The ground beneath the ledge trembled slightly. Arn stumbled, catching himself against the rock wall. Einar cursed under his breath, pulling him upright. "What's happening?" Arn asked, panic rising in his voice. Einar didn't answer, his sharp gaze locked on the glowing runes. "Something's coming." The chanting grew louder again, faster now, almost frantic. The light from the runes pulsed in time with the strange pounding sound, brighter with each beat. Then, from the shadows near the stone, something moved. At first, Arn thought it was just another cloaked figure stepping forward, but as the shape emerged, his stomach twisted. It was larger than the others, hunched slightly, with its head lowered. Its cloak was different too, darker, heavier, its edges dragging along the ground. The cloaked figures parted as it moved, giving it space, their voices rising higher, as if welcoming it. Einar muttered under his breath, his voice tight. "That's not one of them." "Not exactly." Arnie's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Einar didn't look away from the figure. "Some of these groups, they take people, thralls mostly, and turn them into something else. They break them until they'll do anything, until they barely remember who they are." The larger figure moved closer to the stone, stepping fully into the light. Arn felt his heart drop. The cloak slipped slightly as it moved, revealing a face beneath it. Not painted like the others, but scarred, hollow-eyed, with a strange symbol burned into the skin. The face twitched slightly, as though fighting against something unseen. It's one of us," Arn whispered, horror in his voice. "It's a thrall." Einar's jaw clenched. "Not anymore. Not to them." The chanting shifted again, rising to a feverish pitch as the thrall stepped toward the stone, its movements stiff, unnatural, like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. Arn felt sick. "Einar, we have to do something. They're using them." Einar grabbed his arm sharply. "And what do you expect us to do against this many? If we go down there, we die. Or worse, we end up just like that." Arn stared down at the thrall, his chest tight. The thought of ending up like that, mindless, broken, chanting for someone else's cause, made his skin crawl. The cloaked stranger shifted slightly below, finally moving again. Their sharp gaze turned from the glowing stone back to the ledge. Einar noticed and cursed under his breath. "They're still watching us." Arnie's breath caught. "Why? Why do they care about us?" Einar gave him a grim look. "Because they don't just want any thralls. They want ones who run, ones who fight. Those are harder to break, but more valuable when they do." The pounding sound deepened, vibrating through the rocks beneath their feet. More cloaked figures moved toward the glowing stone now, their voices almost screaming as the runes flared brighter. Suddenly, one of the Vikings shouted something, his voice panicked. He pointed toward the stone, backing away. A few of the others followed, their torches shaking as they stumbled. Even the dogs whimpered, pulling against their leashes. The cloaked stranger finally lifted both hands, raising them high toward the stone as if signaling the others. The thrall stepped closer, now standing directly before the glowing runes. Its scarred face twitched again, its hands shaking slightly, as if some small part of it still fought against what it was being forced to do. Then, in a low, broken voice, it began to speak, not chanting like the others, but repeating strange words, each syllable slow, deliberate. The runes glowed so bright now that the entire gorge was bathed in pale light. The water shimmered strangely, almost unnaturally, and the air felt thick, heavy, like breathing through smoke. Arn gripped the rock wall, panic rushing through him. "Einar, we can't just sit here. Whatever they're doing, it's getting worse." Einar's gaze stayed locked on the thrall, his jaw set. "I know, but if we move now, we'll be caught in the middle of it." The ground trembled again, harder this time, a few loose rocks tumbling down the slope. The cloaked stranger didn't flinch. They just looked up at the ledge again, their sharp eyes fixed on Arn, and for the briefest moment, their lips curved slightly into what might have been a smile. Arnie's stomach twisted. They're doing this for us. Einar gave him a sharp look. What are you talking about? Arnie's voice shook. They could have ignored us. Let the Vikings take us. But they didn't. They're keeping us here because they want us to see this. Einar didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said he couldn't deny it. Below, the thrall's voice grew louder, the strange words tumbling from its mouth faster now, almost desperate. The light from the runes flared again, brighter than ever, and a crackling sound filled the air, like fire catching on dry wood. Suddenly, the stone split down the middle with a sharp crack, glowing even more fiercely as dust and steam rose from it. The chanting reached a fever pitch. The cloaked figures screamed the words now, their torches swinging wildly, while the Vikings backed away in panic. The cloaked stranger finally lowered their hands, their sharp gaze never leaving the ledge. And then, in one final, shocking movement, the thrall turned its head, looking up at the ledge too. Arn froze, his chest tight, as those hollow eyes locked directly on him, as if it somehow knew him or wanted him to be next. The crack in the stone widened with a deafening sound, sending a wave of heat and light through the gorge. Einar grabbed Arnie's arm, pulling him back from the ledge. We're leaving. Now. But Arn couldn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the thrall, on the stranger, on the glowing stone that now seemed ready to split apart completely. And then, just as the light flared brightest, something inside the stone moved. The light from the cracked stone poured across the gorge like liquid fire, shimmering against the walls and making the water glow as if molten. The chanting had become a wild, frenzied scream, the cloaked figures swaying in unison, their torches whipping through the air. The Vikings shouted in confusion, some backing away toward the mouth of the gorge, others holding their ground, their weapons trembling in their hands. Arn pressed himself back against the cold stone of the ledge, his heart hammering so hard he thought his chest might burst. His breathing was sharp, uneven, every muscle in his body screaming to run, but his eyes stayed locked on the scene below. The thrall stood in front of the glowing crack, its scarred face twitching, its hollow eyes fixed on Arn as if he were the only thing that mattered. Its broken voice still repeated the strange words, faster now, louder, the sound almost desperate, almost pleading. Einar grabbed Arnie's arm, trying to pull him back from the edge. We're leaving. Do you hear me? Whatever's happening, we're not staying here. Arn didn't move. His gaze stayed locked on the thrall, his stomach twisted in fear, and something else, something he couldn't quite explain. The cloaked stranger below finally stepped closer to the stone, their painted face calm amid the chaos. They raised both hands high, their voice cutting through the chants like a blade. The others fell silent for a brief moment, waiting. Then, in a clear, sharp tone, the stranger said something that even Arn could understand. Open. The cracked stone groaned, a deep, grinding sound that echoed through the entire gorge. The runes glowed so bright now that Arn had to squint, and the air grew hot, thick, almost hard to breathe. The Vikings panicked, shouting to each other, their dogs barking wildly, pulling at their leashes. One of the men hurled a spear at the stone, but it clattered uselessly against the glowing surface, bouncing back as if repelled by an invisible force. The cloaked figures ignored them, their chanting rising again, faster, more chaotic, as the crack widened. Then, with a deafening snap, a piece of the stone broke away entirely, falling into the glowing light beneath. The thrall's voice cut off suddenly. Its head jerked to the side, its hands trembling violently, as if fighting something deep inside. For a heartbeat, everything slowed. The chanting, the shouting, even the strange pounding sound from the gorge floor. And then something inside the stone moved again. Arnie's breath caught as a dark shape shifted within the light, its edges sharp, its movements unnatural. The glow around it flickered, almost like it was breathing, as if something living was trying to push through. Einar cursed under his breath. "We're leaving. Now." But before they could move, the thrall let out a sudden, piercing scream. Its hollow eyes widened, its body arching backward unnaturally, as if it were being pulled apart from the inside. The cloaked stranger didn't flinch. They simply lowered their hands slowly, tilting their head as if pleased. The crack widened further, the light surging outward in a blinding wave that spilled across the gorge, making the water boil and the air hum with energy. Arn stumbled back from the ledge, shielding his face. His ears rang, his heart pounding. "Einar, what's happening? What is that thing?" Einar grabbed his arm again, his voice sharp. "I don't know, and I don't want to find out. Move." But even as they turned to run, Arn risked one last glance over his shoulder. The dark shape inside the stone pushed further into view now, its form still half hidden by the light, but its movements sharp, deliberate, almost human. The cloaked figures screamed louder, their chanting turning into a frenzied cry of triumph. The thrall dropped to its knees suddenly, its head snapping toward the ledge again, locking eyes with Arn. Its scarred face twisted, and for just a brief second, Arn saw something almost human in its expression. Pain, fear, a silent plea. Then it spoke again, its voice broken and desperate, but this time, the words were different. "Run, before it takes you too." Arn froze, his heart twisting, but before he could respond, the crack in the stone exploded outward with a thunderous sound, sending shards of glowing rock flying in every direction. The cloaked figures screamed in triumph, some falling to their knees, their arms raised high. The Vikings shouted in terror, stumbling back, some dropping their weapons as the dogs howled wildly. And then the dark shape stepped fully out of the stone. Arn caught only the faintest glimpse before the blinding light swallowed it again. Long, sharp limbs, movements too smooth to be human, and eyes that glowed faintly in the haze. The cloaked stranger turned to face it, lowering their head slightly in what looked almost like reverence. Arn felt his blood run cold. Whatever had been locked inside that stone, it wasn't meant to be free. Einar pulled him sharply back from the ledge. "We're leaving now," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. Arn stumbled after him, his legs heavy, his mind still reeling from what he'd seen. The ground shook violently as they ran along the ledge, stones tumbling down into the gorge below. The chanting grew louder again, almost deafening, mixed with the screams of Vikings trying to flee. Arn glanced back one last time as they reached the end of the ledge and froze. The dark shape was climbing out of the cracked stone fully now, its form clearer in the flickering light. Its movements were sharp, precise, like a predator testing its limbs for the first time. And then it turned its head slowly toward the ledge, its glowing eyes locking directly on Arn. For a single, heart-stopping moment, everything else seemed to disappear. The chanting, the shouting, the chaos. It felt like those glowing eyes were looking only at him, as if it had chosen him from the start. The cloaked stranger followed its gaze, their painted face twisting into a faint smile. Einar pulled at Arnie's arm desperately. "Move!" But Arn couldn't move, his body frozen, his mind screaming as the thing inside the stone took its first full step into the world, its glowing eyes never leaving his. The chanting reached its highest pitch, a sound so sharp and wild it made the air feel like it might tear apart. And then, with a sudden, terrifying stillness, the chanting stopped. The entire gorge fell silent. The dark shape straightened fully, standing tall amid the glowing shards of the stone, its gaze fixed on Arn. And in the silence, it tilted its head slowly to the side, mimicking the exact same motion the cloaked stranger had made when they first saw him. Arnie's breath caught, his heart pounding harder than ever. Whatever this thing was, it knew him, or wanted him, and now was free. The silence in the gorge was worse than the chanting. The sudden absence of sound pressed down like a weight, broken only by the distant crackle of fires and the soft drip of water running along the rocks. The air felt thick, too heavy to breathe, and even the Vikings, who moments ago had been shouting and fighting, now stood frozen, their torches flickering nervously. The thing that had crawled out of the cracked stone straightened to its full height. Its movements were unnervingly smooth, almost graceful, like something that had practiced walking long before it had a body. The glow around it dimmed slightly now, allowing its shape to be seen more clearly. It was tall, too tall, its limbs long and thin, its skin stretched tight across sharp bones. Its face, or what passed for one, was pale and smooth, almost human, except for the faint cracks running across it like veins of broken stone. Its eyes glowed faintly, 2 points of pale light that shifted as it scanned the gorge. Then, slowly, deliberately, it turned its head back toward Arn. Arn couldn't move. His chest felt tight, his breath shallow. Those glowing eyes locked on him again, unblinking, almost curious. Einar grabbed his arm hard, yanking him away from the edge. "Don't look at it," he hissed. "We need to get out before it." The ground shook violently, cutting him off. A low hum rose from the cracked stone, deeper than before, vibrating through the rocks beneath their feet. The cloaked figures dropped to their knees, their arms raised high, chanting again, this time slower, almost reverent. The cloaked strangers stepped forward, moving closer to the thing, their painted face calm, almost pleased. They lowered their heads slightly, as if bowing to it. The creature tilted its head in return, mimicking the motion perfectly. Then it took a single step forward, its foot touching the water in the gorge with barely a ripple. The Vikings stumbled back immediately, shouting to one another in panic. One man threw a spear, but the creature moved too quickly. Almost before the weapon left his hand, it tilted slightly to the side, the spear passing harmlessly through the space it had been standing in just a second before. The Vikings began to scatter, pushing toward the mouth of the gorge, their dogs barking wildly, straining at their leashes. But the cloaked figures didn't move, their chanting growing louder, as if urging the thing on. Arn stumbled backward along the ledge, his hands scraping against the cold stone. "Einar, it's coming closer." The creature took another step forward, its glowing eyes never leaving him. Einar's grip tightened. "Move, Arn. Now." They scrambled along the ledge, their boots slipping on the damp rock. The forest stretched below, dark and silent, a sharp contrast to the chaos in the gorge. A sudden roar of panic erupted below as one of the Vikings, too slow to escape, was caught by the thing. Arn glanced back just for a second, and immediately wished he hadn't. The creature moved faster than anything he had ever seen. One moment, the Viking was running. The next, the creature's long, sharp fingers wrapped around his chest, lifting him off the ground as easily as if he were weightless. The man screamed, thrashing wildly, but the thing didn't tighten its grip. It just held him, tilting its head again, studying him with those glowing eyes. Then, with terrifying calm, it dropped him into the water like he was nothing, already turning its gaze back toward Arn. Arnie's heart pounded. "Einar, it's following us. It's not letting us go." Einar didn't look back, his jaw tight. "Then we make it lose us. Keep moving." They kept scrambling along the ledge, trying to stay low. But every time Arn risked a glance over his shoulder, those glowing eyes were still locked on him, unblinking, following every movement. The cloaked stranger had turned toward them now, too, standing still amid the chaos, their face calm, their eyes sharp. For the briefest moment, their painted mouth curved into another faint smile. Arnie's stomach twisted. They planned this. They wanted it to find us. Einar didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said he believed it too. The ledge narrowed suddenly, forcing them to slow. A few loose rocks tumbled down into the gorge below, splashing into the glowing water. The creature paused for a moment, tilting its head toward the sound. Then it crouched slightly, placing one long hand against the wall of the gorge. Arn froze, watching in horror as its sharp fingers dug into the stone with ease, pulling its body upward. Einar cursed under his breath. "It's climbing after us." The chanting below rose again, faster now, almost frantic. The cloaked figures seemed to cheer as the thing climbed higher, as if this was all part of their design. The creature scaled the rock wall effortlessly, its long limbs moving with terrifying speed. Each movement was smooth, deliberate, as if it wasn't just chasing, it was hunting. Arnie's breath came fast, panic rushing through him. Einar, it's going to catch us. What do we do? Einar scanned the ledge quickly, his mind racing. Ahead, the ledge curved sharply and widened slightly near a cluster of jagged rocks. We keep running. If we can get around that bend, maybe it won't see us. Arn nodded, his legs shaking but still moving. They scrambled toward the bend, their boots slipping on loose gravel. Arn glanced back again, just in time to see the creature reach the ledge. It climbed over the edge in one smooth motion, crouching low for a moment before standing tall. Its glowing eyes locked on him instantly, and for the first time, it moved differently, faster, more direct, like a predator that had finally found its prey. Arnie's chest tightened. Einar, it's running. The creature moved along the ledge with terrifying speed, its long limbs carrying it forward in great strides. Its sharp fingers dug into the rock with each step, keeping it steady as it advanced. The cloaked stranger had stepped closer to the rock wall below, their head tilted, watching silently, as if curious to see how far the chase would go. Einar grabbed Arnie's arm, almost dragging him forward. Move faster. They rounded the bend, their breaths ragged, the forest below still far too steep to climb down. The ledge widened slightly, but there was no clear escape. The creature was closing the distance quickly now, its glowing eyes bright in the dark. Arn stumbled against the rocks, his hands scraping against the rough surface. Einar, we can't outrun it. Einar scanned the area desperately, his eyes darting to a sharp drop just ahead. A thick tree branch jutted out from the cliffside, stretching over the forest below. It wasn't safe, but it was their only chance. There, he said sharply, pointing. We jump, grab the branch, and slide down. Arnie's eyes widened. What if it breaks? Einar gave him a hard look. Then we don't have to worry about it catching us. The creature let out a low, strange sound behind them, a soft, clicking noise, almost like laughter. Arnie's heart pounded harder. It's close. They reached the edge, the drop steep, the forest floor hidden in shadow. The branch swayed slightly in the wind, creaking under its own weight. Einar grabbed Arnie's arm, pulling him closer to the edge. On three, the creature rounded the bend behind them, its glowing eyes locked on Arn, its movements faster now, more eager. Arnie's chest tightened, his breath coming fast. Einar counted sharply. 1. The creature lunged forward, its long limbs reaching out. 3. Einar shoved Arn toward the edge. Arn leapt, his hands reaching for the branch, his heart in his throat as the ground disappeared beneath him. The branch creaked loudly under his weight, bending dangerously. He clung to it tightly, his arms burning as he slid down toward the forest below. Einar followed, right after him, landing hard against the branch, his boots scraping against the bark. Above them, the creature reached the edge of the cliff, crouching low, its glowing eyes staring down at them. For a terrifying moment, it didn't move. It just crouched there, tilting its head again, studying them as they slid lower and lower toward the forest. Then, with a smooth, terrifying motion, it placed one hand against the edge, preparing to jump. Arnie's breath caught, his chest tightening. Einar, it's coming after us. Einar didn't look up, his jaw tight, his grip firm on the branch. Then we'd better hope the forest slows it down. Above them, the creature shifted its weight, crouching lower, its glowing eyes never leaving Arn. And then, without hesitation, it leapt. The creature's leap was silent but powerful, its long limbs stretching wide as it dove toward the branch where Arn and Einar clung desperately. The wind rushed past Arnie's ears as he slid further down, his hands burning from gripping the rough bark. The forest floor below was still far away, hidden under a tangle of roots and shadows, and he wasn't sure if they'd survive the fall if the branch gave out. Einar glanced up, his face tense. It's going to land on us. Move faster. Arn didn't need to be told twice. He pushed himself downward, his boots scraping hard against the bark. The branch creaked under their combined weight, bending further toward the forest below. The creature landed on the upper part of the branch with a heavy thud, its long fingers digging into the wood. The entire branch shook violently, nearly throwing Arn off balance. He clung tighter, his heart racing, feeling splinters pierce his skin. It crouched low now, moving slowly, almost like a predator stalking prey. Its glowing eyes locked on Arn, unblinking, focused only on him. Einar shouted sharply, his voice rough. "Keep sliding, don't look back." Arn forced himself to keep moving, his arms aching, his legs trembling. The ground below was closer now, but still too far for a safe jump. The branch swayed harder as the creature crawled closer, its movements smooth, deliberate, like it knew they couldn't outrun it. Einar glanced upward briefly, then grabbed a smaller branch jutting out from the side. His jaw tightened. "Arn, listen to me. When I say jump, you let go. Don't argue." Arnie's chest tightened. "What about you?" "Just do it," Einar snapped. The creature crept closer, its fingers digging into the bark, leaving deep grooves. The branch groaned under the strain, bending dangerously low now. Arnie's boots slipped, his body jolting as he barely caught himself. His heart hammered in his chest, his breath sharp. Einar waited, watching the creature, his grip tightening on the smaller branch. Then, in a sharp voice, he shouted, "Now." Arn hesitated for a split second, fear freezing him. But Einar's glare was enough. He let go, dropping from the branch entirely. The air rushed past him as he fell, his stomach twisting, but the lower branches broke his fall, scraping against his arms and legs before he finally crashed onto the forest floor. Pain shot through his body, but he was alive. Above, Einar swung hard on the smaller branch, using his weight to shift it sharply. The thick branch the creature crouched on groaned under the sudden strain and snapped. The creature fell with it, crashing through the air in a tangle of splintered wood. Arn scrambled backward, his breath ragged, as the creature slammed into the ground just a few feet away, sending a spray of dirt and broken roots into the air. The impact shook the ground, leaving a shallow crater. For a moment, everything went still. The forest was silent except for Arnie's heavy breathing. Then the creature moved. It pushed itself up slowly, its glowing eyes flickering briefly before steadying again. Its movements were slower now, less smooth, as if the fall had damaged it. But it was still alive, and its gaze locked on Arn once more. Arn scrambled to his feet, his legs shaking. "Einar, we have to run." Einar dropped from the remaining branch, landing hard beside him. He grabbed Arnie's arm, pulling him toward the dense forest. "Move, don't look back." They ran, dodging roots and branches, their boots crunching against the damp forest floor. Behind them, the creature followed, its long limbs moving through the trees with an unnatural grace despite its slowed pace. The chanting from the gorge had faded now, replaced by distant shouts as the Vikings and cloaked figures clashed again. The glow from the cracked stone was dimmer through the trees, but it still pulsed faintly, as if whatever had been released was still connected to it. Arn stumbled over a root, nearly falling, but Einar pulled him upright. "Keep going. We need to lose it in the trees." They weaved through the forest, their breaths sharp and uneven. The creature's movements grew louder behind them, its long fingers scraping against bark as it pushed through. Suddenly, Einar stopped, pulling Arn to a halt. Ahead of them, the forest opened slightly into a shallow ravine where a fallen tree had created a natural bridge across a stream. Einar scanned the area quickly, his mind racing. "We can trap it here." Arn stared at him in disbelief. "Trap it? Einar, it's not human. It's not something we can fight." Einar grabbed a thick branch from the ground, his expression grim. "We don't have to fight it. We just need to make it fall." Arn hesitated, fear twisting his chest, but Einar's firm grip on his arm snapped him out of it. They crossed the fallen tree quickly, the wood damp and slippery under their boots. Once across, Einar crouched low, pulling Arn behind the thick roots on the other side. The creature approached the ravine moments later, its glowing eyes scanning the forest. It stepped onto the fallen tree cautiously, its movements slower, testing the wood with each step. Einar whispered sharply, "When it's halfway across, we push." Arnie's heart pounded, his palms slick with sweat. He picked up a loose stone, gripping it tightly. The creature moved forward, its long limbs balanced perfectly as it crept across the narrow trunk. Its glowing eyes flicked upward briefly, scanning the trees ahead, but it didn't slow. Einar counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3. They rushed forward, shoving their weight against the side of the fallen tree. The wood shifted sharply, the damp ground giving way under the sudden force. The creature reacted instantly, digging its sharp fingers into the bark to hold on. But the tree tilted too far, the slick moss-covered surface offering no grip. With a sharp crack, the tree rolled, tipping fully into the ravine. The creature slipped, its long limbs flailing briefly before it plunged into the rushing water below. The current pulled it under instantly, its glowing eyes vanishing beneath the surface as it was swept downstream. Arn collapsed against the roots, gasping for breath, his body trembling. Is it over? Einar didn't relax, his eyes locked on the stream. Not until we're far away from here. They moved quickly, staying close to the thicker trees as they left the ravine behind. The forest grew quieter the further they went, the glow from the cracked stone barely visible now. Arnie's chest still heaved, his mind racing, but for the first time since the gorge, a flicker of hope stirred in him. Maybe they had finally escaped. But as they pushed deeper into the forest, a strange sound broke the silence. A low hum, faint but familiar. Arn froze, his blood running cold. Einar, do you hear that? Einar stopped too, his jaw tightening. The hum grew louder, pulsing faintly through the ground. Then, somewhere in the distance, a faint glow flickered through the trees. Pale, rhythmic, almost like the runes on the stone. Einar's face hardened. It's not over. Arn turned slowly, his stomach twisting as the humming grew stronger. And then, from the shadows ahead, a figure stepped into view. It wasn't the creature. It was the cloaked stranger. Their painted face was calm, their sharp eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. They tilted their heads slightly, just as they had before, and for the first time, they spoke in clear words Arn could understand. You ran well, but it wasn't meant to catch you yet. Arnie's chest tightened, fear and confusion twisting inside him. What do you mean? The stranger's faint smile widened slightly. Because you're not meant to escape. You're meant to bring it back. Before Arn could react, the faint hum rose sharply, vibrating through the forest floor. And from the shadows behind the stranger, two glowing eyes blinked open. The two glowing eyes behind the cloaked stranger flared brighter, cutting through the darkness of the forest. The hum beneath the ground pulsed faster now, each beat sharp and deliberate like a heartbeat. Arn froze, his chest tight, his mind spinning with panic and disbelief. Einar shifted closer to him, his hand gripping a branch like a weapon, his jaw tight. We can't run forever, he whispered sharply. If we're ending this, it's now. The cloaked stranger stepped aside, giving the glowing eyes a clear path forward. The creature moved into view slowly, its long limbs emerging from the shadows, its cracked skin catching the faint light filtering through the trees. It had followed them all this way, silent and patient, as if it had known this moment would come. Arnie's heart pounded, but something in the creature's movement caught his attention. It was slower now, its steps less steady, almost hesitant. The fall into the ravine had weakened it, and the water had left streaks of dirt and moss clinging to its limbs. The stranger tilted their head slightly, studying Arn as though curious about what choice he would make. You've seen what it can do. You know what it is, and you know you can't kill it. Not like this. Arnie's throat felt dry, but he forced himself to speak. Then why? Why chase us? What do you want with me? The stranger's faint smile returned. Because it remembers you. Arn stiffened. Remembers me? I don't even know what it is. The stranger gestured toward the creature, their painted face calm. It was human once, long before you were taken as a thrall. Some who are broken become more than slaves. They are reshaped. The strongest of them never truly forget. The words hit him like a stone. Arn stared at the creature, his mind racing, trying to see past the cracked skin, past the glowing eyes, to imagine what face might have once been there. Something in the creature shifted at that moment. Its head tilted slightly, not toward the stranger, but toward him, and for the briefest second, those glowing eyes flickered, less sharp, less alien, almost like a memory trying to surface. Einar's grip tightened on his branch, his body tense, ready to fight. But Arn held out a hand quickly. "Wait." Einar glanced at him sharply. "Are you insane? It's going to kill us if we don't stop it." Arn took a slow step forward, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. "No, look at it. It's hesitating. It's not like the others." The stranger's smile faded slightly, their painted face lowering. "Careful. You mistake hesitation for mercy." But Arn ignored them. He took another step forward, his voice low, steady, though his hands trembled. "If you remember anything at all, you don't have to do this. You're not theirs. Not anymore." The creature shifted, its limbs tensing, but it didn't move forward. Its glowing eyes flickered again, softer for a moment, and its fingers twitched, scraping lightly against the dirt. The hum in the ground pulsed faster, almost angry, and the stranger frowned, tilting their head. "You're interfering. It won't hold for long." Arn kept his gaze on the creature, his voice firmer now. "Who were you before all this? You fought them once, didn't you? That's why they chose you. Because you didn't give up." The creature's body stiffened, its cracked face twitching. For the first time since they had seen it, it made a sound, not the strange clicking, not the low hum, but a rough, broken exhale. The stranger's voice sharpened, cutting through the air. "Enough. It belongs to us now." They raised a hand, their fingers curling in a strange motion, and the hum pulsed sharply through the ground. The creature jerked suddenly, its body twisting as if pulled by invisible strings, its glowing eyes flaring brighter. Arn stepped closer quickly, his voice desperate. "You don't have to listen to them. You can fight it." The creature froze again, its limbs trembling violently, as if two forces were pulling at it. Its head jerked to the side, first toward the stranger, then back toward Arn. For a tense moment, the forest was silent except for the pulsing hum and the sound of Arnie's ragged breathing. Then, with a sudden, sharp movement, the creature turned, not toward Arn, but toward the stranger. The painted figure's eyes widened slightly, the faint smile finally vanishing as the creature lunged forward, its long limbs striking with terrifying speed. The stranger stepped back quickly, raising both hands, but the creature was faster. Its sharp fingers dug into the painted cloak, pulling them to the ground with a heavy crash. The hum pulsed violently, the ground shaking, but the creature didn't stop. It held the stranger down, its glowing eyes bright, its cracked face twitching as if fighting against itself. Arn stepped back, his chest tight, unable to look away. The stranger's calm voice had finally turned sharp, almost panicked. "It won't hold. If you kill me, it will lose control completely." The creature let out a low, broken growl, pressing harder against the painted figure. Einar pulled Arn back, his voice low. "If it loses control, it won't matter who it turns on next. We need to leave now." But Arn stayed still, his gaze locked on the scene. "It's choosing. It's finally choosing for itself." The creature's limbs tensed violently, its glowing eyes flickering erratically. Then, with one final motion, it released the stranger and stumbled back, its body shaking, as if rejecting both commands entirely. The hum beneath the ground pulsed one last time, then slowly faded, leaving the forest silent once more. The stranger pushed themselves upright slowly, their painted face unreadable, though their sharp gaze stayed fixed on the creature. For a long moment, they said nothing, only watching it with something almost like disappointment. Finally, they stood, brushing the dirt from their cloak. "Interesting. Perhaps there's still something human left in it, after all." They glanced at Arn briefly, their painted mouth curling into the faintest smile again. "But this isn't over. Not for you. Not for it." And then, as silently as they had appeared, the strangers stepped back into the shadows, vanishing into the forest as if they had never been there. The creature stood still for a moment, its limbs trembling, its glowing eyes dimmer now, almost soft. Then it turned toward Arn, its cracked face twitching slightly, and let out a low, broken sound that almost resembled a word. Arn stepped closer slowly, his chest tight. "You're free now. You don't have to follow them anymore." The creature tilted its head, its glowing eyes flickering once more. Then, without another sound, it turned away, moving slowly into the deeper forest until its pale figure vanished between the trees. Arn stood there for a long moment, his heart still racing, before Einar finally pulled at his arm. "It's gone. We should be gone too before it changes its mind." Arn nodded slowly, his thoughts heavy. As they walked deeper into the forest, leaving the gorge and its horrors behind, Arn couldn't stop thinking about the creature, about who it might have been before, and what it might become now that it was free. For the first time in days, the forest felt quiet, the air fresh and calm. But deep inside, Arn knew this wasn't the end. As they moved further away, Einar glanced at him, his tone softer than usual. "You think it'll come back, don't you?" Arn looked ahead, his jaw tight. "Maybe. But if it does, I hope it remembers that it wasn't always a monster." They walked in silence after that, the forest closing around them, the faint glow of the runes finally gone from the horizon. But somewhere far behind them, in the quiet heart of the forest, two pale eyes flickered faintly in the dark, watching, waiting, and remembering.